Stay with me in this one because it's probably one of my most important lectures that affects every single human on this planet on a daily basis. Do you ever find yourself frustrated or locked in serious disagreements with family, friends, colleagues, or even the world at large? Do conversations seem to escalate quickly, as though people are talking past each other instead of engaging with one another? If so, the issue may not simply be difference of opinion. It may be faulty reasoning or logical fallacies operating underneath the surface. What makes today different is that we are no longer just arguing over dinner tables or in classrooms. We are now speaking into online forums, comment sections, group chats, and social media platforms where our words reach far beyond our immediate circles. We are responding not just to people we know, but to headlines, viral clips, trending topics, and strangers with very strong opinions. There is a great deal happening in the world today, and the speed at which information moves can intensify disagreement. In that environment, reasoning shortcuts spread quickly, and when faulty reasoning becomes normalized, division deepens significantly. My name is Dr. Whitney Costers, and I'm an English professor, and the reason I've dedicated an entire video to logical fallacies is because the way people reason right is often heavily reliant on faulty reasoning, and so it is directly shaping the tone of our culture, our conversations, and even our relationships. This is one of the central reasons we study logical fallacies in writing courses. If you can't recognize faulty reasoning in what you read, you can't evaluate it. And if you can't evaluate it, you can't respond effectively with your own words. So if this topic resonates with you, be sure to subscribe and share this lecture because recognizing faulty reasoning is not optional. It directly affects the quality of your arguments, your words, and your writing. If you felt at any point in the last few years that conversations seem to escalate more quickly than they used to, or that people just seem more certain and more reactive at the same time, what you're noticing is not simply disagreement. You are noticing reasoning shortcuts operating at high speed. Logical fallacies are not rare mistakes made by careless thinkers. They are patterns of faulty reasoning that become persuasive precisely because they feel efficient, morally clear, and emotionally satisfying. And in a communication environment that rewards immediacy and confidence, those shortcuts spread very easily. Social media algorithms amplify confident claims. Short clips remove context, and headlines are optimized for reaction. And so all of that accelerates faulty reasoning. So what I want to do in this lecture is not simply define a handful of fallacies and then move on. I actually do that in another lecture if you just want to know the fallacies quickly. In this lecture, I want to examine how some of the most common fallacies show up in everyday life, why they're so persuasive, and why learning to recognize them is not just an academic skill, but a very practical one. Because when faulty reasoning becomes normal, conversations become really fragile, and people start talking past each other. Disagreement turns into character attack, and nuance disappears. And most of that happens without anyone consciously deciding to be unreasonable. You should know that the same patterns show up in opinion pieces, political commentary, advertising, and even student essays. So if you cannot see them, you cannot avoid repeating them. So let's begin with one of the most common and destabilizing fallacies, the false dilemma. Now, a false dilemma occurs when a complex issue is reduced to only two options, as though no middle ground exists. You've heard versions of this countless times. If you don't support this proposal, then you don't care about safety. You're either with us or you're against us. If you really valued this relationship, you would do this. Notice what happens in each case. The issue itself may be complicated, layered, and worthy of discussion, but the framing collapses it into a moral binary. Now, you see this constantly in political rhetoric when policies involving economics, healthcare, immigration, or education are framed as compassion versus cruelty, freedom versus control, patriotism versus betrayal. The complexity of legislation disappears, and disagreement becomes a test of identity. You also see it in persuasive writing when an author ignores alternative solutions in order to strengthen a claim. The result may sound decisive, but it is logically incomplete. Now, the reason this fallacy is persuasive is because ambiguity makes people anxious. When an issue is complex, it requires patience. A false dilemma removes that discomfort by simplifying the world into two camps and by offering clarity. But clarity gained through oversimplification is not accuracy. When writers rely on false dilemmas, they weaken their own credibility because informed readers recognize exactly what's been omitted. Closely related to this pattern is the hasty generalization, which has become amplified in the age of viral media. A hasty generalization occurs when someone draws a broad conclusion from limited evidence. One example becomes proof of a trend, one incident becomes representative of an entire group, and one study becomes definitive truth. This is one of the fallacies most likely to fuel discrimination and hostility because it transforms isolated behavior into collective identity. When a single negative action is treated as evidence of what they are like, complexity disappears and suspicion hardens. Consider how often a single viral video clip circulates online and is then treated as proof of, well, this is what teachers are like, or this is what this generation believes, or this is what people in this city always do. Within hours, comment sections are filled with sweeping claims about entire professions, age groups, regions, or communities. Or notice how a misleading headline spreads faster than the correction that follows. Fake news frequently depends on this move. Limited, selective, or distorted data is presented as universal truth, and once that narrative is emotionally satisfying, it spreads very quickly. The danger here is not just intellectual error, it is social damage. When generalizations replace careful evaluation, people stop responding to individuals and start reacting to categories. Now, that shift is where prejudice takes root. It is where anger scales from disagreement to resentment. In writing, this same mistake appears when a student relies on one anecdote as though it proves a sweeping claim. A single personal experience, a single article, or a single statistic cannot bear the weight of a broad conclusion. Strong arguments require representative evidence, contextual awareness, and careful qualification. Otherwise, the reasoning may feel forceful, but it will not be defensible. Another extremely common reasoning shortcut is post hoc reasoning, which assumes that because one event follows another, the first must have caused the second. This fallacy appears constantly in discussions of health, economics, and public policy. So a new law passes and then prices increase months later, so the law must be responsible. A leader takes office and the economy shifts, so the shift must be entirely due to that individual. You also see this when someone receives a vaccine and then later develops an unrelated health condition, and the timing alone is treated as proof of causation. Or when crime rates rise after a policy change and the policy is immediately blamed without examining broader economic trends, demographic shifts, enforcement patterns, or long-term data. During election cycles, it is very common to see charts that begin and end at convenient dates to suggest direct cause, even when the underlying system is influenced by dozens of variables. The emotional force of these claims comes from sequence. Event A happened, event B followed, therefore A caused B. Now, it feels logical because the timeline is clear, but complex systems rarely operate in straight lines. Economies respond to global markets, supply chains, consumer confidence, and previous policy decisions. Public health outcomes reflect long-term patterns, not isolated moments. When we collapse that complexity into a single cause, we create certainty that may not be justified. In argumentative writing, this mistake appears when correlation is treated as causation without sufficient proof. If you claim that one factor caused an outcome, you must demonstrate that relationship with credible evidence, acknowledge alternative explanations, and show why your interpretation is stronger than competing ones. Otherwise, the argument may sound confident, but it will rest on unstable reasoning. Now, let's turn to one of the most corrosive fallacies in modern discourse, the straw man. A straw man occurs when someone misrepresents another person's argument in order to make it easier to attack. You see this constantly in televised debates, social media threads, and political commentary. A person expresses a nuanced position with conditions and limits, and the response reframes it in extreme terms. So someone argues for reform of a policy, and the reply becomes, "So you want to eliminate it entirely?" A person raises concerns about the cost of a program, and the response becomes, "So you don't care about people who need help?" A parent questions a curriculum decision, and the reaction becomes, "So you're against education?" The original claim is distorted into something sharper, more absolute, and easier to condemn. Now, this tactic spreads because extreme positions generate stronger emotional reactions than moderate ones. Once the distorted version circulates, people begin responding to that version instead of the original argument. Outrage escalates not because the initial claim was extreme, but because it has been reframed that way. In writing, this happens when an author oversimplifies an opposing argument instead of engaging with its strongest version. Rather than quoting accurately and addressing the full context, the writer reduces the opposition to a weaker form. Serious academic writing requires intellectual honesty. You must always represent opposing views fairly and accurately before responding to them. Anything less may feel rhetorically effective in the moment, but it undermines credibility and weakens the integrity of your argument. Equally destructive is ad hominem reasoning, in which the focus shifts from the argument to the person making it. Instead of examining evidence, someone questions motives, intelligence, background, or character. Oh my gosh, we see this daily in comment sections and political discourse. A scientist presents data, and the response becomes an attack on funding sources rather than methodology. A journalist publishes an investigation, and critics dismiss it by labeling the outlet instead of addressing the facts. A public figure proposes a policy, and the discussion shifts immediately to personal history, appearance, or past mistakes. The substance of the claim disappears, and it's replaced by character judgment. This move is extremely powerful because it feels decisive. If the person can be discredited, then the argument seems unnecessary to examine. But arguments stand or fall on evidence and reasoning, not on whether we like, distrust, or disagree with the speaker. In writing, attacking a source rather than evaluating its evidence weakens your position. Even if a source has limitations or bias, you must explain specifically how the reasoning is flawed, where the data is incomplete, or why the methodology is unsound. Simply dismissing the person behind the claim signals that you are avoiding analysis rather than engaging in it. Another fallacy that thrives in a fast-moving media culture is appeal to emotion. Emotion itself is not flawed. In fact, persuasive communication often includes emotional resonance. Now, the fallacy emerges when emotional intensity replaces evidence entirely. Headlines are crafted to provoke outrage before facts are examined. Images circulate without context, accompanied by language designed to trigger fear or anger. Fundraising emails, campaign ads, and viral posts often rely on worst-case scenarios or dramatic framing to bypass careful evaluation. When a message makes you feel something strongly before you understand what's even being claimed, that is a moment to slow down. Strong emotion accelerates belief. It reduces the pause in which reasoning would normally occur. In persuasive writing, emotional appeal can strengthen an argument, but only when it supports rather than substitutes for evidence. Data without human context can feel abstract, but emotion without analysis is simply manipulation. When emotion replaces structure, the argument may feel compelling, yet it remains logically unstable. Underlying many of these patterns is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out and favor information that confirms what we already believe. In an algorithm-driven environment, this tendency is very much amplified. Search results, news feeds, and recommended videos adjust based on prior engagement. If you interact with a particular viewpoint, you are shown more of it. And over time, your beliefs feel reinforced, not because they've been rigorously tested against opposing evidence, but because they have been repeatedly echoed within your informational environment. This is how division deepens. Opposing perspectives begin to feel not just incorrect, but irrational or malicious because they rarely appear in full form within your own feed. Writers must actively resist this tendency by engaging credible counterarguments. Strong writing anticipates opposition, presents it accurately, and responds with evidence. When you do this, you demonstrate intellectual maturity and strengthen your credibility. Without that effort, arguments become echo chambers on the page. So, what do all of these patterns have in common? Well, they reduce cognitive effort, they provide clarity without full examination, they feel strong, and they spread easily in environments that reward speed and outrage. Learning logical fallacies, then, is about strengthening your ability to read critically and write responsibly. When you encounter a strong claim, you should always pause and ask yourself these questions. What exactly is being asserted? What evidence supports it? Is that evidence sufficient? Are alternative explanations being considered? Is the issue being framed as only two options? And is emotion replacing analysis? If you can recognize faulty reasoning in what you read, you are far less likely to reproduce it in what you write. And in a culture that often rewards reaction over reflection, disciplined reasoning is a serious competitive advantage. As always, thank you so much for joining me here today. I truly hope this lecture has clarified how reasoning patterns shape modern discourse and will help make the world a little less hateful, angry, explosive, and divisive. Truly. Please share this video with others so we can all become more conscious of what's going on in the way we speak and argue with one another. Be sure to explore my related videos on rhetoric and critical thinking, and check out some of my videos on literature too, because after all, literature is one of the most profound ways we connect with each other as humans. Be well.